Welcome, everyone. This is the Orthodox Experience. Today, I have the special treat to be able to talk with in the interview Protodeacon Paul Drozdowski. He's a friend of mine that I've known since seminary times. He serves at the St. Alexander Nevsky Cathedral in Howell, New Jersey. He is also an iconographer. He's done some work for our church in doing a very ancient icon of ours. He fixed it, and he's done many commissions in his career. And so today I'd like to speak to him about how and why he became an iconographer, and how we can raise up a future generation of iconographers. My own daughter, she is a very talented artist, and I'm trying to express upon her the blessing it would be if she would able to use her gifts that God has given us for the glory of the church and to bring people to Christ through her artistry. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Father Paul. Hi, Father Paul. Thanks for being with me today. So Protodeacon Paul is he serves the church, as I had already mentioned, in New Jersey as a protodeacon, but he's also well known for his iconography work. So Father Paul, again, thanks for being here. Could you tell us a little bit of how you came to become an iconographer? How did you do it? Why did you become an iconographer?
Sure, and thanks for inviting me to be able to do this with you. Well, first off, I do have a background in fine art to begin with. It's something that I always had with me. I've always been drawing, always been doing something artistic throughout my whole life. And I grew up in a clerical household, so, you know, little kids, they draw things commonly that they'll see all the time. And, you know, I was no different than that, except that most people will grow out of that, and I never quite grew out of that. I started, you know, copying icons just in a rather childish manner. And it just kind of took a life of its own, I guess. Basically, I don't know. I mean, in terms of my own personal history, and I guess I was about an adolescent, maybe 12, 13, something like that. And people were encouraging me to maybe visit Jordanville or just try to actually paint, because I hadn't painted anything. It was just all sketching. And I had several clerics encourage me, well, just try to see what comes of it, you know. And so I would show different people, and I did have several books about iconography that were gifted to me, including one that had very old instructions from Mount Athos. And so in my own way, I tried to extrapolate some of those things and apply them, but without anyone really to just sit down with me and teach me, because unfortunately I wasn't able to get to Jordanville so easily in that time. I hit a lot of dead ends, I guess. What helped me in that respect, though, was just seeing very well painted icons at my own church. The church I was attending at that time was St. Vladimir's Memorial Church in Jackson, New Jersey, and that was built to commemorate the baptism of Russia, the 950th anniversary of the baptism of Russia. They laid the cornerstone in 1938, and then in 1988, when Rocor did the huge millennial celebrations, the focus of the celebrations took place there. So the Iconistas there was painted by Bishop Daniel, the late Bishop Daniel of Erie, who was a wonderful Old Believer iconographer. And it's something like 5-6 rows high. I think it's one of the tallest Iconistases in the United States. And just being able to see them up close myself, and I just remember, like, you know, after liturgy, I would spend a few minutes and I would get up really close, and my brain would try to do reverse engineering in terms of the layers and then the colors and stuff like that. But otherwise, copying, just lots and lots of copying. And that's something that, if you were fortunate to find someone to study iconography with, you're copying all of the old, you know, classic icons anyway. That's a great way to learn iconography. There's no better way to learn how to draw the different forms, because it is a stylized type of art. It's not copying from life or anything like that. Although it's good to have that sort of a background as well, because these are not meant to be totally disembodied things that we're seeing in icons. They are reflecting things in our own reality. So, you know, a person's hand should look like a hand. It shouldn't look like something, I don't know, that's not. So after high school, I did go ahead.
So you didn't actually have any formal schooling. I know in times past in the Orthodox, traditional Orthodox countries, there might have been schools of iconography. There's no such, I guess, school here in the States. So
No.
you pretty had to kind of just through your own experience and trials and failures, pick it up the best you could.
Well, until my early to mid 20s,
okay,
that was the case. Because you know, I did go in terms of university. I attended Temple University, but I went to their art school in Philadelphia, and my focus was illustration, graphic design with illustration. Like even more, the degree is graphic design, but it's the focus was illustration. But I was able to take grip making classes and a lot of classical style drawing and painting classes as well, as many as I could, as I would fit in my schedule. I was lucky to study with a really good painting teacher there. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until after I finished art school, I was able to go to Jordanville. And I applied to the seminary. And while I was there, basically, the obedience that I had was in the icon studio, which, I mean, when I think about it, it's kind of funny, because when you think about being assigned an obedience, you know, it's something like mopping the floor or peeling potatoes or something like that. And here it's like, no, you're assigned to study how to paint icons. So that was very enlightening. It was very enlightening because it showed me that the 10 years prior to arriving in Jordanville, everything that I had tried to teach myself basically was a good guess. Everything I tried, but it was really hit or miss.
Yeah, Jordanville was known for several good iconographers, yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
Jordanville was known to have several iconographers that would go out and do iconography, correct, amongst the Russian churches here and abroad?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm referring to Holy Trinity Monastery for people who might not be aware. Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, New York, not far from Cooperstown, and the icons that have come out of the Jordanville studio, many Orthodox people in America have seen them and not even realized, just because the founder of the Jordanville School of Iconography, for lack of a better term, was Archimandrite Cyprian, and he was in the Russian diaspora during the 20th century. He was trying to bring back the old authentic style of iconography. At least here in the States, there were some people in France that were doing the same thing at the same time, but in the United States, it was pretty much him. It was him and Bishop Daniel, like I said, but Father Cyprian was much more prolific and accepted. Well, I guess he accepted students, but he was being based at the monastery. People could come, and he was teaching other monks how to paint. The late Archbishop Filippi of Chicago
Yes.
was one of his students, and then worked alongside him as well. And any of the seminarians that might have come in who had interest in iconography, he taught, I don't know, probably dozens. I just found out that last week, Father Theodore Kufos in Canada reposed. He is of Arab extraction. He graduated from Jordanville, I believe, as a seminarian. But either way, he was also one of Father Cyprian's students, and painted it in that style. Even though it had a bit more Byzantine Greek flavor to it, I would look at those icons outside. Yeah, there's some kind of connection to Jordanville there. It was unmistakable, because that's how he was taught. So I taught with another one of Father Cyprian's students, who was Father Andrew Erasnev, and unfortunately he's no longer there at the moment. He lives in Australia. So currently there's not many. I think there's only one higher monk who's painting, and I don't know if there's anyone he might be teaching at the moment. So it's a bit of a precarious moment, I guess you could say, in the history of the Jordanville School of Iconography. Now, I know you had asked about schools. I when I'm saying school, I mean in terms of a style. Yes. So for there's, when we talk about art history, there's various school like styles of painting, schools of painting, and that's what I mean. There's never, even when I was there learning from Father Andrew, it's nothing so formalized, structured. It was definitely 101. It was him. Let's see, there are about 5 or maybe 6 people, 6 of us total, working, but we were at all different levels and all different, points in terms of our own expertise and things like that. Like you said, there's nothing comparable here to what you can find in a traditionally Orthodox country. And at least I could not speak about countries like Greece and the Balkans. I don't know what the situation is there exactly, but I know that in Russia there are schools of iconography. But I know that is to say a school which teaches iconography. They're connected to the academies, maybe in some cases to seminaries. But you'll find them connected to all of the theological academies in Russia, and it's all doing just some really tremendous work, and it's really great to see here. And you may have some people trying to teach, and we really live in the wild, wild west. There's sort of like no canonical oversight, and I mean, I guess it's true of Orthodoxy in general. Here, it's kind of rough when you think about it. You just have all different kinds of personalities, and everything under the sun you can find here, and people trying to pass themselves off as experts in anything. And I'm just speaking broadly within the Orthodox Church, from theology in general to iconography to chanting or whatever. Well, I'm an expert, and I don't know, if you build up enough of a internet presence, I guess, that might give you the air of authenticity and credence, but it's a problem. It's a real problem.
That goes across, I guess, spectrums of different aspects of the church. Yeah, I guess true. In many ways, Father, what you say. So, I find iconography pretty daunting because I'm not very artistic. I don't have that gift, that ability. I kind of see things traditionally, probably in many ways. But also, iconography is a very daunting to me because so many times people would come up with ask questions. And I know other priests probably feel this. They ask questions about the iconography that they see in their churches, the icons. And I know that there's a rich theological symbolism and traditions that go along with them. As you say yourself, there's also a canonical basis for how everything should be done in icons. So as your so-called experience becoming an iconographer and that out, how much of that weighs on the artistic side and how much is that theological, like you're learning the meanings of things, and does one need to know all those meanings to be a good iconographer?
Well, no, it's a good question. At least starting out, I think a person really needs to focus more on the artistic side, and definitely, as a new iconographer, beginner, however you want to put it, you're very strictly copying the old icons that have been accepted by the consensus of the church, not something that was painted in the 70s or whatever. Like we're talking about, like something from 700 years ago, whatever. And because you're copying those old icons, which are canonical, you sort of through osmosis, I guess, in a way, you're learning what is permissible, what is not, what is canonical. What are the colors that you are meant to use. What are you not supposed to use? Things like that. And then I think that as a basis is more important. And then over time, the theological nitty-gritty details can be learned, because again, there's, I think, a tendency for people to over intellectualize, and then at the same time also, over mysticize maybe different aspects, and we lose sight of the fact that it's still art. It's very easy, again, like it's very easy to just make some sort of a pronouncement and have it published here, and then okay, now that looks credible. Let's say about colors, for example, colors that Christ would be wearing. You could make an announcement. No, it's always going to be red and blue, and the red is always on the inside, blue is always on the outside. And while that's not false in general, while that tends to be a tendency, you can literally just go through the history of iconography over the centuries and find many examples where that there's exceptions, and it's not because there's sort of I don't know, it's not because it's just on a whim or something like that. There's reasons for it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I tend to convert myself coming into the church. That people would always like to make the distinction between whether a icon is written or painted, and I think you're touching upon the point where there's this fine line between the theology of it, and then the the artistry of iconography, and that it's not, but it's both.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that, to touch on that briefly, that's also a challenge as well, because some of the best theological treatises about iconography have been written in Greek. So trying to translate things from Greek into, it seems like, almost any other language, you'll lose something in the translation. It's very easy to misconstrue things. It's such a touchy thing. So you have that as well. That's an additional challenge, I guess you could say.
I think that's a challenge just as a whole, theologically, across the Orthodox, the English-speaking Orthodox world, that very, very little has really been translated into our tongue. So what we get is just such a fraction of what is really out there in the Orthodox experience, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to kind of recap kind of what you've said so far, you've always had an interest in art, and you've kind of, that's what your training is, at an academic level, is art. But you've growing up in a clergy family, have tried, and you had an interest in taking that gift and the interest that you have and try to apply it into iconography. Did you become an iconographer because you truly felt a call to it, or you felt like there was a void there that you tried to fill and that was needed, or is it there that you tried to fill? Could you talk about that a little bit?
No, it's absolutely a calling for me. Absolutely. I've reflected on that a lot, and over the years, and I've concluded I'd be pretty miserable as a person if I wasn't able to paint icons. In more recent years, it's funny what you said about a void, because in more recent years, I found myself sort of more and more wanting to paint particular saints or subjects or whatever myself, because I wasn't personally happy with how they have been depicted, or what was readily available in terms of reproduced icons or whatever. One example I could give concretely was Saint Nikiforos, the leper, who's now very popular, as he's been revealed as an intercessor in this COVID crisis, and a fantastic saint. If for anyone who's watching, listening, if you've not read his life, I would recommend it. It's very, very inspiring. But I didn't like any of the icons that were painted of him. To me, they didn't look like him at all. And yeah, absolutely. Iconographic depictions of people are, like I said, they're very stylized. There's sort of a canon of how to go about that. Again, it's not just on a person's, rather an artist's personal whims. There are ways. There is a certain sort of formula to follow, and but notwithstanding, it should still look like the person who's depicted. It's a remarkable thing, I think, that you can go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art today, go to their early Byzantine section. It's like a hallway, basically, and they have medallions from like the 3rd century something in Rome. You can find depictions of Saints Peter and Paul. And you can find, because they still look like our icons today. So the thing is that Saint Nikiforos, he had sort of Well, for him, it's a little bit more challenging because there was some disfigurement, I suppose, from the leprosy, and that is something that you generally don't depict, because you're supposed to be showing a glorified saint as he's, to some extent, as he's transfigured.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I mean, if he was still, if the saint was old and emaciated, probably in a transfigured state, they would not look like that. But again, this comes back to, is this person recognizable or not? It's a pretty fundamental thing, because if you can't recognize an icon of St. John Chrysostom as being St. John Chrysostom, then what's the point?
Right.
That's someone who is emaciated, for example, because of his extreme asceticism. So I decided I was going to try to paint my own icon of St. Nikiforos, and offered if anyone was interested, and someone snatched it up like within the hour, and then I got a couple more orders. So in the hour, there's a whole number of parishes in the Midwest diocese that have copies of my icon of Saint Nikiforos as a result. So, I mean, he had very peculiar features. Like, he didn't have it looks like he didn't really have a beard per se, but maybe he had some kind of like scruff from under his chin. So, and that's not something that you usually see in icons. It's sort of rare to see an old monastic saint with no beard. It happens very rarely. So that's the only thing I can think of, that maybe the Greek iconographers, they were trying to avoid that, try to make him look a little bit more predictable looking. You know, they gave him like this tiny little wispy beard, but he didn't even have that. You can see in photos. But that's just one example. So, and then there are other, what's personally exciting for me, that I actually get excited about as an iconographer. The topic of Western saints, from that predate the Great Schism. More than anybody else, I get a lot of commissions for those saints, because it's very difficult to find saints of icons of Western saints. At least historically speaking, it looks like that's starting to change, but still, the legacy of the early Christian church in Western Europe it's so rich, and there's so much that is left untouched and that we just don't know about. I certainly don't know about, and I'm just learning all the time. I can't tell you how many times someone's asked me for an icon of Saint so and so, and I had to really delve. Like, do we recognize? Is that actually an Orthodox saint? Yeah, absolutely, it is. Absolutely, they are, and I'm just it's really remarkable. And then I have the challenge of going about, well, how do I depict this person then? Because again, I try to synthesize a little bit of East and West, because I mean, my style is my style, and if I tried to copy some other style innately, I would fail to some extent. I mean, I have painted a few icons in the so-called Western style, like for example, like what I mean by that is the icon of Saint Nicholas over your shoulder, like a soft style like that. There have been a couple of occasions where I needed to, and I'm fine with that. But that's not really, my strong suit. Otherwise I paint in the style that I was taught in, and it's very Byzantine. But here, if you have a Celtic saint, it also, to me anyhow, it doesn't make sense to pound that square peg into the round hole and Byzantify this Celtic saint. And again, you could argue about the cross connections that exist in the ancient world, and there are connections between early Christian Egypt and the early Christian or early Celtic monasticism. There is some crossover and so on and so forth, but still, okay, I'll give an example, like how to depict any bishop saint from that was Celtic, say, I don't know, Saint Patrick. You know, does it make sense to paint him as a modern Orthodox bishop with a mitre and the panagia hanging around his neck and things like that? Obviously not. I mean, and it's not only because of the anachronism, but also because he never would have worn anything close to that necessarily. You know, by the same token. I'm sorry.
It's supposed to be a disrespect to put him in clothes that you know that he probably never ever wore.
Right. Exactly. But by the same token, if you make a fair attempt to depict what he likely would have, because we don't know 100% what the vestments in the 5th century looked like. We have a good guess. That might not necessarily be recognizable. So I kind of borrow from both worlds, you know. I don't try to make him look overly Byzantine, but I might add, you know, where I do add rather, the omophorion around his shoulders, because again, this is a vestment that is identifiable as a bishop in the Orthodox Church, and to leave that out would confuse someone who's looking at it. So even though that might be a bit on the anachronistic side or whatever, I put that in regardless. But you know, obviously Roman tonsures, if that's what they had, that's what they had. You know, that's not a part of our tradition today in the East, but I have to respect that. So it's always an interesting challenge. It's really never a dull moment for me, trying to come up with these prototypes. And then on top of it, just how, again, if you go back to how do they look? You know, in many cases, these saints from the West, the earliest depictions that still exist are 12th to 13th centuries. It's like way after the split. I mean, you do the best you can. You read their life, try to determine how old they are, how old they were when they died, and that'll give you an indication of whether they had gray hair or not, and things of that nature. So
I could see how that could be very exciting for you, how it could motivate you, because it can get your creative thinking going, because you're now making something that hasn't been made before. It's not,
right.
You don't have impressions out there that are stuck in your mind that you probably are kind of gravitating back to when you're doing your icon. You're now really be in creative process of making something that's never existed before. So I can see where that is a very exciting thing for artists, for iconographer.
Yeah, and it's a little terrifying too, because I know I'll make some kind of a misstep, and it's just it's very daunting. Mm-hmm. But you know, another example was the icon that I painted of All Saints of Scotland, and I did that a long time ago. I did that even before I went to Jordanville. That was one of the last icons that I completed before I studied. I did any type of formal studying in Jordanville. I did any type of formal and in Jordanville. I just recall that starting out, basically I used as a basis, or as an example, the icon of All Saints of Russia that Father Cyprian had painted in the 1950s, because he took the board and he considered the board almost like a map of Russia. So the Saints of Moscow he put in the center, and the Saints of Kiev he put down below that in the south. And the Saints of Novgorod he put up in the upper left quadrant, things like that. So I followed that same pattern as best as I could.
Very neat. Got just a couple more questions for you, Father, and then I'll let you go on your day. What would you say to the next generation of maybe hopeful iconographers, or better yet, how would you impress the idea of maybe studying and becoming an iconographer into a career that has potential? It sounds like that you yourself were the recipient of encouragement for people who recognize the talent that you may have. How do we do that in the church? Because I know with other priests, I've spoken with the Serbian priests in Serbia, they get churches and they can build or have the church filled icons for a relatively inexpensive price, because there are so many iconographers there. Where here, it's hard to find an iconographer that has the time to be able to travel, do these things, and do it at a cost that most parishes can probably afford because of the lack of the resources, resources. So I think we need more iconographers here, and I think we need more. What do you suggest? How do we get people to how do we develop these iconographers?
That's a good question. And I think the challenge lays in the fact that unfortunately here in America we have so many people who claim to be teachers of iconography, who really just have no business doing so. So the issue turns into one of discernment. And of course, that's not an easy feat. So the question then remains: then how do you tell the real from the counterfeit? How do you know who to go to talk to, to learn from, and who should you sort of stay away from? And so I guess probably the answer to that question lies in just trying to do a little bit of research and see whoever's teaching iconography, what was their training? What was their, was there sort of throughout the generations, maybe was there like an unbroken link? Like, for example, that's easy to do, find from an Orthodox country. It's not quite as easy here, but I mean, let's say maybe a Greek Orthodox monastic establishment here. It's likely that their monks or nuns, if they have someone who's painting there, they learned in one of the icon schools, either in Greece or maybe even in Mount Athos, if it's a monk. Obviously, like right there, you don't have anything to worry about. Obviously, I would I would promote Jordanville iconography as well. It's an authentic school, so that's the word I was looking for: authenticity. Is this someone who just is entirely self-taught and has some sort of is this someone who just is ideas of his own and he's alone in that, and some sort of unique ideas? I wouldn't recommend somebody like that. But someone who has an authentic living tradition of iconography. To that end, definitely any type of monastic establishment is going to be a safer place, basically.
So you recommend kind of like an apprentice style training for iconographers, correct?
I mean, that's probably that's going to be your best bet in terms of learning real iconography. There are many people that offer sort of classes, I guess, that travel about. And again, some of these I would not recommend at all, and others I would. And absolutely, just look at what their formation was. Again, are they just kind of some sort of lone wolf, or did they actually learn in some sort of a real icon painting school? in Russia or Greece or something like that, then especially if you're starting out, you have the ability to attend one of those classes. It might be coming to your area. Sure, test it out. Give it a shot. I'm no matter who they are, I'm always a little leery about those, just because they allow anyone in to learn iconography. You don't have to be a believer. You could be absolutely nothing. You could be a Hindu. You could whatever, and they'll teach you. They'll teach the artistic process. And I don't know how you could necessarily get around that here. That could be a discussion for in and of itself. But
It's an interesting,
like I said,
because like you said earlier, you felt a call, and so
sure,
I encourage my daughter in this, what I see in her already, but she has to have that call to do it. I see it this way, and I try to always find, and I think every layman, whether man, woman, anyone, should find a way that they can serve the church. Not all of us are going to be clerical.
Sure.
And iconography is one blessing the church needs from people, and it doesn't matter the church if you're ordained or not, if you're a man or female. So, if you need to have the call, right now. So, truly right.
Absolutely.
You really be a believer in that God's asked you to do this.
Right. Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's a vocation.
To that,
thanks to the internet. Just thanks to the internet and technology and in general, now everything's kind of going online. It used to be that you needed these great big coffee table books about iconography. If you weren't able to go to whatever museum, but now you can visit everything online, so to speak. So for any young person that's interested, absolutely, I would encourage them to take it further. Don't suppress that. Take it further. Do the copy the old ancient icons first, and basically seek someone out who's authentic, and see if they'd be willing to take you under their wing.
I guess, as we're talking about the future generations of iconographers in America here, particularly, is the fact that if you would do this and you put your time and effort into it, but you want to be compensated for that. I know clergy here in America aren't always even compensated. Biographers but that's why don't they deserve. My own daughter, when I mentioned about iconography as a career, first thing she's a younger journalist, she gets on Google and she, how much do iconographers make? So, but she's not wrong that there is a business side of things, and that we don't need some of us to put investment into it, that maybe we need to get something out. So maybe you could speak of something about the business side of things, and also share with us how people who are watching this video may be able to reach you, so that they too can maybe ask you about commissions and whether or not you're accepting new work.
Sure. The business side is always tough. Because again, it's because being a vocation, it's a very delicate balance. If you're not compensated enough, or something even resembling enough, then you're forced to do something else for a living, and then you won't have time for it. So you kind of shoot yourself in the foot with that. Obviously, I'm speaking as somebody who's living in the world, not a monastic, and somebody who, furthermore is, a family to provide for, but even just for yourself, you have to be able to live, and the labor is worthy of his hire. So, but at the same time, there's also it's hard to, you have to struggle. You have to struggle against this this idea that, well, yeah, but I can't charge too much because this is something holy and it's a vocation, and it's for, either it's for the church or it's for this, this one person's, particular salvation. And it's analogous to, absolutely, because it's a vocation. It's analogous to being a clergyman. I mean, you should be compensated. It's not so much a transactional type of a thing, like, well, I serve X liturgy, so I should get paid for X amount. Even though, unfortunately, sometimes that's broken down as such. I know that, but there has to be a different way of looking at it in terms of, what do you need to earn so that you are free to do this, whatever type of ministry that is, including iconography. What is it that you need? So you have to look at it that way. But, at the same time, there is a limit to what most people are able to pay as well.
Yes.
So it's a delicate balance. That's everyone, and I've never found any type of a straight answer. So I unfortunately can't necessarily give a straight answer either. But it's highly individual, I would say, and no one really. There's very few people. I mean, that very few people that probably charge to its fullest extent, like what it's worth. There's very few people. So you don't get into this to get rich, but you have to be a little tough on yourself as well, So I'm sorry, there is a second part to your question.
I think you got them both about
Okay.
whether or not you can actually make a living at being an iconographer, and how the business side interacts with the spiritual side in this vocation. So I think you did hit them just quite well, Father, and I thank you. Your talk is interesting. Didn't know that you had so much artistic training at the collegiate level. So I can see that this is something that was instilled and that you had inspired you from a young age. And I can only hope that all our Orthodox children, young people, even older people out there that have a talent for this and feel like they would like to serve the church in a capacity to explore this further, to start drawing the icons. I know we have long church services sometimes in our Orthodoxy, and my young children are sometimes not able to sit still, pray as we would like, and we consent and we give them a piece of paper and a piece of paper and a pencil, and I tell them to draw the icons that you see during the service as a form of prayer. I think these little things like this can instill in our young people maybe the hope that we'll have our own school of iconography, as you say, a style and a strength of people in the future that can go throughout the churches and adorn the churches properly, not with unfortunately with the substitute prints and stuff that we see mainly in a lot of these new churches, but with real traditional icons gifted to the church. So
sure, yeah, absolutely. Oh, and then you had asked how people can get a hold of me.
Yes, that's very important.
My website, yeah. No, my website is pd-icons.com for Paul Drozdowski, icons.com. And there's a form there. You can send me an email that way. My email is, I believe it's listed there as well within the website. And I'm on Facebook as well. You can always reach me there. I have a personal page, but I also have an iconographic page as well. And I'm on Instagram. I believe I'm there as Rublev's pupil. But it's not difficult to track me down via Instagram as well. and I post new icons, new work there all the time. And if anyone, so I'm always taking commissions as well. And if anyone just wants to talk, especially young people, I'm happy to do so. Give them, if people want to send me, sketches or whatever, and want me to critique them, I'm happy to talk to anybody about pursuing iconography.
That's wonderful. I will put in all that, your website and pertinent information in the description box here on YouTube.
Great.
And that way people can find you if they have any further questions. But Father Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with my audience today. And I wish you a wonderful upcoming Lent. May it be edifying and profitable for you, and so that you can meet Pascha properly.
Thank you, Father Michael. Thank you for this opportunity. I wish the same for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.